On July 24, 2024, the North American Defense Command, NORAD, stated that it had detected two Russian Tu-95 Bear heavy bombers in the Alaskan Air Defense Zone. The two bombers likely flew from Anadyr Air Base in the Russian Far East, a frequent jumping-off point for Russian aircraft flying across the North Pacific Bering Sea. One of the Bears, serial number RF 94186, has been involved in at least one previous flight near the air defense zone. Russian bombers have made a practice of circling near U.S. territory since the Cold War. This time, however, the bombers weren't alone. They were accompanied by two Xian H-6KG bombers of the People's Liberation Army Air Force. One of the planes, top photographed by NORAD, is serial number 20013, which, according to the Air Force, is AH-6KG bomber of the Chinese Air Force's 10th Bomber Division, 28th Air Regiment, based at Anqing Air Base, Anhui Province. A Japan-based think tank reported that it spotted two PLAF Y-20 heavy transport aircraft at Anadyr, suggesting that the transports carried maintenance personnel and equipment to allow the bombers to stage from the Russian base. Meanwhile, in mid-July, two B-52H Stratofortresses flew from their home at Minot Air Force Base, North Dakota, to Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, Alaska, to participate in Exercise Arctic Defender. The two planes, both from the 69th Nighthawks Bomb Squadron, were 60-012 Heavy Hauler and 60-018, known as POW-MIA. All three bombers are subsonic, vintage designs dating back to the 1960s or earlier. The Russian Tu-95MS, Chinese H-6, and American B-52H are all non-stealthy designs incapable of penetrating modern air defenses and, as a result, have been relegated to the role of standoff missile carriers. All three are nuclear capable, although the HSIXS capability is more theoretical, as there are no identified Chinese aircraft-carried nuclear weapons. Also included in the flights were a handful of fighters from the US and Russia. NORAD sent two Air Force F-35A Lightning IIs of 354th Fighter Wing from Eielson Air Force Base, Alaska, to intercept the Chinese and Russian bombers. Two F-16 Fighting Falcons also took off from Eielson, and two Royal Canadian Air Force CF-18 Hornet fighters flew in from Cold Lake, Alberta. According to USNI News, Russian Su-30SM and Su-35S fighter jets accompanied the bombers for part of the distance, but do not appear in any NORAD photos. The Sino-Soviet flight was the first time Chinese bombers had flown near Alaska. It was also the first time Chinese and Russian bombers have flown together in formation near Alaska. Joint flights by bombers of the two countries is a relatively recent phenomenon, with a similar flight near Japan taking place in 2022. The aircraft flew in formation within 200 miles of the Alaskan mainland, putting the planes in the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone, ADIZ. An ADIZ is a large plot of airspace that a country believes is vital to its air defense, in which it monitors aerial traffic both entering and exiting. Both military and civilian aircraft are allowed to enter, since ADIZ typically extends into international airspace, although in some cases the controlling air force may require a flight plan. ADIZs are not internationally recognized and legally binding, unlike airspace. In other words, both the Chinese and Russian aircraft were within their right to conduct the flight. The Alaska ADIZ is huge, including huge swathes of international airspace. It also adjoins Russian territory in the Bering Sea, where the two countries share a border. Under certain circumstances, a Russian aircraft can fly just a few minutes outside of Russian airspace into international airspace and find itself in the Alaska ADIZ. Russia has long-flown bombers and other long-range aircraft into the American ADIZ. Two 160 Blackjack and 295 MS Bear bombers have flown near US and NATO territory for training purposes, or to make a political point. In 2024, 295s flew near Norway ahead of a NATO exercise, and a NATO spokesperson said more than twice as many bomber flights were counted in 2023 compared to 2020. The flights coincide with the entry of Finland and Sweden into NATO, as well as NATO supplying of Ukraine with military equipment to beat back a Russian invasion. Russia cannot take direct action against NATO, so it signals its displeasure with flights of nuclear-capable bombers. China has several reasons to participate in such a flight. The PLAAF lacks long-range flying experience, and the route into the Bering Sea is one of the few ways it can conduct a long-distance flight over water. China may want to conduct joint training to learn from Russian aircrews, who are well accomplished in flying long distances. It's also retaliation for U.S. ships and aircraft transiting the South China Sea, which China unilaterally claims 90% of, claims that are not backed by international law. American forces also routinely fly over the Taiwan Strait, which China protests, claiming the strait is part of its internal waters. Last month's flight was a tit-for-tat by Russia and China, both of whom have their own political grievances with the U.S. It also makes clear that the two countries are working more closely than ever, though it doesn't necessarily mean they intend to fight on the battlefield side by side anytime soon. China and Russia both have large armies, nuclear weapons, and unsettled territorial disputes with one another. How much of this cooperation is because the two plan to work together, and how much is because each has the potential to become the other's worst nightmare?